Now we will look at the comparison and also the contrasting of pragmatic and conceptual metaphor theories. Although figurative language is an important aspect of everyday language usage, it has been very recently that psycholinguistics have been conducting studies to look at this phenomena of figurative language and have proposed two theories, pragmatic theory and metaphor conceptual theories, best to understand the phenomena of figurative language and especially with relevance to metaphor. First, we will look at the pragmatic theory. Pragmatic theory is a theory which is mostly worked upon by Grice, and it is generally held that linguistic communication takes place within a context of shared assumption about communication. So when we talk about context of shared assumption, so first of all, according to this theory, context is important, and context which is of shared assumptions. So when we are talking about shared assumptions, that takes us to the understanding of conventions. Conventions are the norms and values that one context or one culture has towards language and use of language and actions by the speaker of that particular culture. So this pragmatic theory talks about the context and also the conventions, because conventions are based on the shared assumption. Now, according to Grice, we strive to be informative, clear and relevant as well as and truthful. So this is primarily in context to the values and norms of a given context. Grice points is that these conventions provide basis for interpreting what others mean, because we generally assume, unless we have information to the contrary, that such conventions will be observed. So when we are looking at what people assume or what people think or form opinion, we are in fact assessing the conventions that are at work behind that. Looking at this example, Harold was in an accident. He had been drinking. So when you look at these two examples, you need to infer or form your opinion based on certain norms and conventions which you have developed in a particular culture. So more than likely, you would consider Harold's drinking is maybe a factor in his accident. However, if you think about it, the drinking might have been unrelated to the accident. He might have been driving safely, although intoxicating, when another driver maybe ran a red light. So for that matter, Harold might have been a passenger in the car or might have been drinking soft drinks. So how are we going to assess the relevancy of these two examples? It is only through context or conventions that an appropriate interpretation is drawn. So the pragmatic theory holds that we comprehend figurative language by considering the literal meaning, then rejecting it. Now, this is proposed by Searle in 1975. According to this particular research, the assumption is that we use several stages in terms of comprehending, of which 3 are most relevant. Stage 1, where the listener extracts the literal meaning of a sentence. So first stage is the extraction of literal meaning. Stage 2 is when listener decides whether the literal meaning is what the speaker intended. If in stage 2 the listener decides the literal meaning was not intended, Then the listener computes in stage 3 an indirect meaning based on communicative conventions and the direct speech act. And that is why this phenomena, that considering the literal meaning and then rejecting it. The second theory is the conceptual metaphor theory. Now, this has been proposed by Lakoff and Johnson. Lakoff and Johnson. They have argued that metaphors are not creative expressions, but rather instantiation of underlying conceptual metaphors. When we talk about instantiation, it refers to creating instances. So they are the instances of underlying conceptual metaphors. They are not creative themselves. For example, one conceptual metaphor is that love is a journey. Now, conceptual metaphors will be put, basically, when you look at the conceptual metaphors such as love is journey, you will try to contend that this conceptual metaphor underlies a number of metaphors about love, all of which deal with journey in one way or another. For example, look how far we have come, or we are spinning our wheels, we have hit a dead-end street. So we are referring to journey in any of multiple different options and multiple different forms. So the conceptual model assumes that the underlying nature of our thoughts process is metaphorical. That is, we use metaphor to make sense of our experiences. Therefore, according to Gibbs, when we encounter a verbal metaphor, it automatically activates the corresponding conceptual metaphor. And he has also suggested that metaphors are accessed quite quickly because they instantiate conceptual metaphors. Hence, the evidence today does not support the pragmatic theory that we comprehend figurative language by first considering and then rejecting it. The conceptual theory appears best as it is equipped to explain instances in which we automatically access figurative meaning.